$200. That is all Rowan Chen has left in the world. The silence in the underground poker room is absolute. Its swallows sound like the ocean swallows light. Green felt stretches across 3 tables, and stacks of cash tower like small monuments to men who have forgotten what it means to need anything. Cigar smoke hangs thick and suffocating. Armed guards in black suits stand frozen at every door, their hands resting on weapons they thought they would never have to use. Rowan stumbles through the hidden entrance, her black and white maid uniform torn at the shoulder seam. Her left eye is swollen completely shut, purple and grotesque against her pale skin. Around her throat, 5 distinct handprints bloom in shades of violet and black, so vivid they look painted on. Blood from a split lip drips onto her white collar, small drops that fall like a metronome marking time she does not have. She does not belong here. Everyone in this room knows it the moment they see her. Vinny and Theo, Matteo Vitale's lieutenants, half rise from their chairs. Their tailored suits catch the light. The fabric alone costs more than everything Rowan has owned in her entire life. They exchange a look, the kind that passes between men who have stood beside each other through violence and blood. An enforcer stands in the corner, his arm raised. The gun in his hand is steady, pointed at a man emerging from the shadows. Rowan does not know who that man is. She has cleaned his mansion for 8 months, invisible as dust, a ghost moving through hallways with a mop and a bucket. But something in her recognizes that the enforcer's finger is tightening on the trigger. Something in her knows that execution is wrong, regardless of who deserves it. She moves without thinking. 110 pounds of maid throws herself at an armed man. Her shoulder connects with his ribs. The gun skitters across the polished floor, spinning until it stops at the edge of the poker table. The enforcer staggers backward, stunned not by the impact but by the impossibility of what just happened. Matteo Vitale steps from the shadows. He is tall, broad-shouldered, built like a man who has spent years ensuring that his body reflects his will. His tailored black shirt is open at the collar, revealing the muscled curve of his chest. A thin scar runs from his left eye to his cheekbone, a pale line that divides his face like a boundary between 2 countries. His hair is dark, swept back with absolute precision. His eyes are storm grey, the kind of grey that looks like it could swallow you whole. He is 34 years old but carries the weight of a man who has lived 3 lifetimes. Those storm grey eyes fix on Rowan. Not on the enforcer. Not on his lieutenants. Only on this invisible maid who just saved his life, and he does not understand why. "What is your name?" he says. His voice sounds like it comes from the bottom of the ocean. Rowan is trembling. Her breath comes in short, panic bursts. She touches her split lip with her fingers and finds blood. "Rowan," she whispers. "My name is Rowan Chen." "How did you get down here, Rowan Chen?" "I was running," she says. "There were men. They were chasing me. I saw the door open and I ran." Matteo turns to Vinny. His movements are slow, deliberate, each one controlled as though he is moving through water. The handprint on her neck. "Who did that?" Vinny's jaw tightens. "Tyler was here 3 hours ago. He left through the garage." "Tyler?" "Tyler Brennan, Matteo's nephew, the man who wears his family name like a costume he can discard whenever it suits him. The nephew who gambles away money that is not his, who borrows against debts he will never repay, who has become a problem that grows larger with every passing week." "She needs medical attention," Theo says. His voice carries the weight of someone who has seen violence and knows what it leaves behind. But Matteo is not listening. He is looking at Rowan's hands, at the calluses that run across her palms like roads on a map. He is looking at the way her uniform hangs on her frame, the way it tells the story of a body that has forgotten what it means to be full. He is looking at her like he is seeing something that no one else in this room can perceive. "Your daughter," he says, and it is not a question. Rowan's eye, the one that is not swollen, fills with tears. "How do you know about Ava?" "I know everything that happens in my home," he says. "I also know that the hospital called your cell phone at 11:41 this morning." I know that St. Mary's emergency room needs $4,000 for emergency surgery within 72 hours. I know that you have exactly $217 in your checking account, because you checked it 4 times today. The room is so quiet you can hear the hum of the cooling system, the low electrical whisper that keeps this underground place from collapsing under the weight of everything above it. I do not understand, Rowan says. Matteo turns away from the poker tables. He walks toward the back of the room, toward the mahogany bar where bottles of liquor sit in neat rows, each one worth more than her monthly rent. He pours himself a drink, amber liquid catching the light. He does not offer one to her. Ava is 7 years old, he says quietly. She has asthma. Severe asthma. 3 weeks ago, during a particularly bad attack, she fell on the apartment stairs. The hospital diagnosed a tear in her pericardium. The sac around her heart. They say if surgery does not happen within 72 hours, she will die. Every word is a blade. Not a blade meant to wound her, but a blade meant to cut through pretense, through the polite fiction that either of them live in a world that cares about fairness. You were eating from the garbage, he continues. Thursday night, in the kitchen. You took the leftover steak, the bread, the vegetables that had been discarded. You thought no one was watching. Rowan's face crumples. She does not deny it. Denial would be a waste of breath. My daughter, she says, and her voice breaks like glass. I have been saving for 2 years. I have every dollar she needs for school supplies, for her medicine, for everything. But Catherine Mercer raised the rent again. 40%. She said my daughter's asthma was a violation of the lease. She said I was negligent. She has been raising it every month. There is nothing left. The gun lies on the floor, still spinning slightly, like a compass trying to find true north. Matteo turns to face her fully. In 15 years of leading men, in 15 years of ordering executions and orchestrating betrayals, his lieutenants have never heard him offer shelter to anyone. They have never heard him speak to anyone with this kind of attention, this kind of presence that feels almost like gentleness. Go upstairs, he says to Rowan. 3rd door on the left. There is a bathroom. There are clean clothes. There is everything you need. Vinny will take you. Do not speak to anyone. Do not tell anyone you were down here. I do not understand, she whispers. You do not have to understand, he says. You only have to go. Vinny steps forward, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. He extends his arm, not threateningly, but with the kind of courtesy that says he understands something has shifted in the room, some invisible line has been crossed, and none of them will ever be able to uncross it. Rowan moves toward him, her legs shaking. As she passes Matteo, she sees something in his face that catches her breath. For a moment, just a moment, she sees a man who has lost everything and rebuilt himself from the ashes, and she recognizes that look because she wears it too. The door closes behind her. The sound echoes like a closing chapter. That was Tyler, Matteo says. His voice is quiet now, controlled, but underneath it runs something cold and dangerous. That was my nephew's handwriting on her throat. Theo's face hardens. You have been looking for proof that he was part of the Salvatore operation. I have been looking for 6 months, Matteo says. I found it. Not on paper. On her neck. He walks to the bar and finishes his drink. Outside, somewhere above this underground room, Miami continues its night. Cars drive past. People walk the streets. Nobody knows that in the space of 4 minutes, something fundamental has shifted. Nobody knows that a man who has spent his entire life controlling everything around him just made a decision that will change both their lives forever. Find Catherine Mercer, he tells Theo. I want to know everything. Her finances. Her properties. Her connections. I want to know what she uses to control people, and I want to know why she has chosen Rowan Chen to destroy. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what comes tomorrow. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to 3 days earlier, when Rowan's world first collapsed, when she was still invisible, when she still believed that no one would ever save her. 3 days earlier, the November rain hammers Miami like a fist against glass, cold and relentless, turning the streets into rivers of neon and asphalt. Water streams down the windows of the Vitale mansion, a palace of white stone and black shutters perched above Biscayne Bay, where the kind of money that moves cities sleeps behind locked gates and armed men. Inside, on the 3rd floor, Rowan Chen kneels before a porcelain toilet, her hand submerged in water so hot it turns her skin the color of boiled meat. The cleaning solution burns her knuckles, eats into the cracks that split her palms from 6 years of this work, from double shifts and minimum wage and a daughter at home who needs a mother with skin still intact. She is 28 years old but looks 40. Her black and white uniform clings to her like a second skin, damp from sweat and chemical spray. The name tag reads Av Chen in faded letters, pinned to her chest at a slight angle, and no one in this mansion has ever looked at it long enough to read her first name. She is invisible here, the way the household staff becomes invisible once you stop seeing them as human and start seeing them as extensions of the walls. Footsteps pass her in the hallway. Someone speaks into a radio. No one glances down. At 6 in the morning, before the sun rises, before the household stirs, Rowan takes the bus across Miami to their studio apartment in a neighborhood where the streetlights flicker and half of them have stopped working entirely. The walls are thin enough that she can hear the couple next door fighting, the woman crying, the man's voice dropping into something that sounds like a growl. Her daughter Ava is 6 years old, small-boned and dark-eyed, with her father's sharp features and Rowan's unbreakable will. She sits up in bed at 3 in the morning, and her breathing sounds like something breaking inside her chest. Not the kind of breathing a child should have. The kind that makes a mother's heart stop. "Mama," Ava whispers, her fingers clawing at the blanket. "I cannot breathe." Rowan has heard this sound 73 times. She has counted. She counts everything now. She counts the dollars in her bank account. She counts the hours until the next shift. She counts the days since her daughter has slept through the night without waking up gasping. "I know, baby," Rowan says, and her voice is steady, the voice of a woman who has learned that falling apart helps no one. She finds the inhaler on the nightstand, the blue one with a cracked plastic casing, and presses it to Ava's mouth. "Breathe in, hold it, there." The breathing eases. It always does. But the look on Ava's face, the fear, the exhaustion, the way she clings to Rowan like she is afraid her mother might disappear if she lets go, that look does not ease. After Ava falls back asleep, Rowan sits on the edge of the mattress and counts her money again, though she knows the number by heart. $217. 17. Not 250. Not 300. $217 in cash, which sits in an envelope in the freezer beneath the ice packs because that is where she has learned to hide things where no one can steal them. The electricity bill is due in 8 days. $43. Ava's asthma medication refill is due in 12 days. $68. Rent on this studio apartment is $900, due in 19 days. Catherine Mercer, the landlord who owns this entire block and the 3 blocks beyond it, has already raised the rent twice this year. The first time, it was because Rowan's window had a crack in it. Catherine had not fixed the window. She had simply raised the rent and told Rowan she was welcome to find somewhere else if she was unhappy. The second time was because Ava's asthma had left water stains on the ceiling. Catherine had stood in the apartment, looked at the stains, and smiled like a woman who had found an excuse. Rowan had paid both increases. She has learned not to argue. The sun rises over Miami, painting the sky in shades of orange and bruised purple, and Rowan takes the bus back to the mansion to continue her shift. Her hands are raw. Her back aches with a pain that has become so familiar it almost feels like part of her skeleton now. The afternoon brings a luncheon. Wealthy women flow through the mansion like a school of fish, all of them moving in the same careful way, all of them wearing clothes that cost more than Rowan's annual salary. Rowan empties the trash in the sitting room where they have gathered, moving quietly, keeping her eyes down, the way she has learned to move through the world. The help these days have absolutely no sense of family planning, one woman says, her voice sharp and bright. She holds a champagne flute between her fingers like it is a weapon. Breeding like rabbits when they cannot possibly afford to feed them. It is irresponsible. Another woman laughs. The sound is like broken glass. Rowan continues emptying the trash. Her hands do not shake. Her breathing remains steady. She has learned that showing emotion is a luxury she cannot afford. Catherine Mercer sits in the center of the room, her back perfectly straight, her blonde hair swept into a style that must have taken someone 2 hours to achieve. She is 54 years old but looks younger because of the kind of money that erases time. She wears a Chanel suit the color of champagne, and her smile is the smile of a woman who has never been told no in her entire life. My building manager told me the Chen girl, the one who cleans at the mansion, her daughter was hospitalized last month, Catherine says, and her voice drops into something almost conspiratorial. Asthma. Can you imagine? A child with asthma, and the mother can barely keep the lights on. The poor thing will probably end up in the system eventually. At least then someone with actual resources can take care of her. Rowan's hands stop moving. The trash bag hangs from her fingers. She can feel Catherine's eyes on her now, even though Rowan is looking at the floor, even though she has made herself as small as possible. Some people are simply not equipped to be parents, Catherine continues, and now she is definitely looking at Rowan. It is almost cruel to expect them to manage it. Rowan finishes emptying the trash and leaves the room. Her legs carry her to the service corridor without her telling them to. It is the part of the mansion no one walks through on purpose, the part where the infrastructure of wealth lives hidden away. Pipes run along the ceiling. Storage closets line the walls. The light comes from a single fluorescent fixture that flickers every 7 seconds like a dying heartbeat. Rowan puts her hands on the wall and breathes. She will be 33 when Ava graduates high school. She will be 54 when her daughter finishes college, if they survive that long, if Ava's lungs allow it. 54. The age Catherine Mercer is now. Except Catherine Mercer has never counted money. Catherine Mercer has never chosen between medication and electricity. Catherine Mercer's daughter will never wake up at 3 in the morning unable to breathe. The corridor is empty except for the hum of the ventilation system and the dripping of water from somewhere Rowan cannot see. She reaches into her pocket and pulls out a folded piece of paper, worn soft from being unfolded and refolded dozens of times. It is her debt list, written in her own handwriting, every number a choice between survival and drowning. Emergency room visit from last month, $1,200. Medication, $340. Rent, $900. Utilities, $180. Food for 1 month, $200. The list goes on and on, a mathematics of impossible choices, and at the bottom, she has written the number that makes her hands shake, $4,000. The surgery. The surgery that Ava needs. The surgery that Dr. Marcus at the hospital said her daughter cannot live without. If she continues to have attacks like the one she had last week, the doctor had said, and his face was kind but serious, her lungs will be permanently damaged. She needs corrective surgery before that happens. It is not optional. How much? Rowan had asked. $4,000, the doctor had said. For the procedure. There are costs associated with the hospital, anesthesia, the surgeon. Insurance will not cover it because it is considered elective. How long do I have? I would say 72 hours. A week at most. The next time she has a severe attack, it could be more dangerous than the last one. 72 hours. 3 days. Rowan is still holding the list when footsteps echo down the corridor. Heavy footsteps. The kind that come from expensive shoes worn by men who have never been told to walk quietly. Tyler Brennan rounds the corner, and he moves like someone who has never questioned his right to occupy space. He is 26 years old, dark-haired, with the kind of face that women might call handsome if it did not hold such casual cruelty in its lines. His suit is Italian silk, deep charcoal, and the watch on his wrist costs more than Rowan makes in a year. He is Matteo Vitale's nephew, and in the hierarchy of the mansion, he exists several layers above her, several layers above the law. "There you are," he says, and his voice is smooth and practiced. "I have been looking for you." Rowan folds the debt list and slides it back into her pocket. She keeps her eyes down. "Sir, I am finishing my shift. I can help you after." "No," Tyler says, and he moves closer, close enough that she can smell his cologne, something expensive and suffocating. "Right now." He puts his hand on her shoulder, and the weight of it is not gentle. He guides her further down the corridor, away from the main part of the mansion, toward the storage closets where no one goes unless they are looking for something they do not want anyone else to see. "My uncle is keeping something from me," Tyler says, and his voice has changed now, dropped into something harder. "Something in his office. Files. Financial documents. I need you to get them for me." "I cannot do that," Rowan says. The words come out quietly, but they come out. Tyler's hand tightens on her shoulder. "I am not asking, you understand? I am telling you. You are going to walk into his office tomorrow morning at 6, when everyone is still asleep, and you are going to copy those files, and you are going to bring them to me. If you do not, if you even think about refusing me or telling my uncle about this conversation, then those medical bills your daughter is racking up will be the least of your problems." Rowan does not move. She does not speak. She is thinking about Ava's face at 3 in the morning, gasping for air, and she is thinking about the surgery that might save her daughter's lungs, and she is thinking about the fact that she has $217 in the freezer. "I cannot," she whispers. Tyler's other hand comes up, and it closes around her throat. Not hard enough to cut off her air completely, but hard enough that breathing becomes a conscious choice, hard enough that she can feel the bones in his fingers pressing against her windpipe. "You can," he says, and he leans closer so his face is inches from hers. "And you will. Because if you do not, I will make sure your daughter never gets her surgery. I will make sure that little girl spends the rest of her life struggling to breathe. And after that, I will make sure you lose her entirely." He releases her, and Rowan stumbles backward, her hand flying to her throat. She can feel his fingerprints already, the pressure of them sinking into her skin, and she knows they will bruise. They will bruise, and she will have to wear a high collar, and Catherine Mercer will notice and smile. Tyler walks away, back toward the main part of the mansion, and he does not look back. Rowan stays in the corridor for a long time, her hand on her throat, her breathing shallow and careful, her eyes fixed on nothing. The fluorescent light above her head flickers, 7 seconds of brightness, 7 seconds of dark, over and over again. Outside, the November rain continues to fall on Miami, cold and relentless, washing nothing clean. The November rain fell on Miami like a curse, cold and relentless, washing nothing clean. Rowan Chen's thin jacket was soaked through, the fabric clinging to her ribs as she walked toward the bus stop at 11:06 p.m., her shift at Matteo Vitale's mansion finally finished. 17 hours on her feet. Minimum wage. No tips because the guests did not tip the help. Her eye was already beginning to swell from where she had walked into a door frame that afternoon, or that was what she would tell people if they asked. Nobody asked. The black SUV pulled up beside her without warning, engine rumbling like an animal that had just woken. Rowan knew that sound. She had heard it before in the driveway of the mansion, always surrounding Tyler Brennan, always bringing men in suits that cost more than everything she owned. The back door opened. A hand reached out and grabbed her jacket. "Get in," a voice said. Not a request. A command. She tried to run. Her feet slipped on the wet pavement, and strong arms lifted her off the ground and pulled her into the vehicle. The door slammed shut. The rain continued to fall outside, indifferent to what was happening inside. They drove her to an alley 3 blocks behind the mansion, a space so narrow that the neon glow from a liquor store flickered red across wet concrete. 2 men got out with Tyler. One of them was the size of a refrigerator. The other had a scar that ran from his temple to his jawline like a map of violence. Tyler Brennan was 26 years old and had never worked a day in his life. He wore a silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar, gold chain catching the red neon light. His eyes were the pale blue of something that had never known mercy. He looked at Rowan the way a man looks at a stain he needs to remove. "My uncle thinks I am weak," Tyler said, his voice smooth and careful, the voice of someone about to hurt you. "He thinks I cannot handle my own problems. You are going to help me prove him wrong." "I do not understand," Rowan said. Her voice was barely a whisper, already trembling like a candle in the wind. "The files in his office," Tyler said. "Financial records. Account numbers. Passwords. You clean those offices. You see everything. You bring me those files, and I will pay you $5,000. You refuse, and your daughter will never see her surgery." The words landed like a knife through her heart. Ava. Her 7-year-old daughter with lungs that didn't work right, with asthma attacks that came in the middle of the night like someone was trying to strangle her while she slept. The surgery cost $4,000. $4,000 that existed only in Rowan's dreams, in the mathematical space between impossible and prayer. "I will not," Rowan said, and the word surprised her. She had not known she was capable of refusing anything. Tyler's face changed. The smoothness drained away, replaced by something raw and ugly. His right hand came up, and the ring on his middle finger, a thick gold thing with a stone the color of blood, caught her above the left eye. Pain exploded through her skull. Her vision went white. She fell backward onto the wet concrete. The two men began kicking. Not randomly, but with purpose, aiming for her ribs, her stomach, the places where bruises would not show above her uniform. She tried to protect her head with her arms, but there were too many feet, too much force. The rain fell on her face, mixing with blood from the cut above her eye. She thought of Ava. She thought of her daughter's voice calling Mommy, calling her name in the dark. She thought of her daughter's fear, and she let that thought carry her away from the pain. After what might have been seconds or might have been hours, the kicking stopped. The men got back in the SUV. The engine rumbled. The vehicle left her there in the alley, bleeding and half-conscious on cold concrete, the neon light flickering red, red, red. It took Rowan 15 minutes to stand. Her phone was dead. She had no money for an ambulance, no money for anything except the $217 in the freezer at home, which was meant to last until she could pick up extra shifts. One eye was already swelling shut. She could feel ribs screaming with each breath. She did not call for help because help required money, and money was a language she could no longer speak. She stumbled back toward the mansion, thinking only of the staff bathroom on the 3rd floor. The first aid kit. Something to stop the bleeding. The back entrance would be open. She had left it open at the end of her shift, always did, a habit born from years of sneaking in and out without being noticed. But her vision was blurry, and her mind was not tracking correctly. The hallway that should have led to the staff bathroom instead led deeper into the mansion, down a corridor she had never walked, toward a door she had never seen. The door was heavy, dark wood, and it opened inward. Voices came from below. Men's voices, low and serious, speaking numbers and names. Rowan's mind processed, poker room. Illegal gambling. Matteo Vitale's private operation. She pushed the door open wider and descended the stairs. The underground poker room was painted midnight blue, lit by a single chandelier that cast shadows across a felt table where 6 men sat with cards and chips and expressions of careful concentration. Matteo Vitale sat at the head of the table, his back to the stairs, his shoulders broad beneath an open white shirt. He had a scar that ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, a line of pale skin that made his face look like something that had survived a war. The man across from him, one of Matteo's own men, one of the bodyguards she had seen 100 times, stood up. He had a gun in his hand. He was pointing it at Matteo's chest. "My boss sends his regards," the man said. "He says your brother's debt is finally being collected." Rowan did not think. She ran forward, her body moving on pure instinct, and she tackled the armed man the way she had seen people tackle in movies, her small frame hitting his much larger one and sending both of them crashing across the felt table. Cards scattered like birds fleeing a burning house. Chips flew through the air. The gun skittered across the floor. The man hit her, hard, and stars exploded in her vision, but she did not let go. She held on to his arm, held on with everything she had left, held on until Vinny and Theo, the lieutenants she recognized from the halls of the mansion, rushed forward and subdued him, held on until the room was filled with the sound of struggling men and the crash of furniture. Then her body gave out. She collapsed onto the green felt, and blood from her split lip fell like rain on the table, drop by drop, steady as a clock. Matteo Vitale turned around slowly. He looked at the unconscious enforcer. He looked at his lieutenants. Then he looked at Rowan, bleeding on his poker table, her one good eye open and unfocused, her body shaking with adrenaline and pain and the aftermath of violence. In 15 years, Vinny had never seen his boss move with anything resembling gentleness. But Matteo knelt beside Rowan, his expensive suit pressing against the blood on the felt, and his voice, when it came, was deep and solid like an oath. "Who did this to you?" he asked. "I should not be here," Rowan whispered. "I am sorry." "You just saved my life," Matteo said. "The least you can do is tell me who marked you like this." She tried to stand. Her ribs screamed. She would not meet his eyes. "You are bleeding on my poker table and you are apologizing," Matteo said. "Who are you?" "Nobody," Rowan said, and the word came out like a confession, like a prayer to a god that had never answered. "Just the maid. Third-floor bathrooms." She reached for the edge of the table to pull herself up, but as she did, something fell from her torn uniform pocket. A piece of paper, folded and refolded so many times it was soft as cloth. The handwritten list. Her debt. Matteo picked it up. His eyes moved across the numbers, across the names, across the mathematical proof of her desperation. Rent $1,400 overdue. Ava Medical $4,000 due in 72 hours. Electric $200 shut-off notice. Catherine Mercer penalty fee $600. His jaw tightened when he read Catherine Mercer's name. He folded the list carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, next to his heart. "Take him upstairs," Matteo said to Vinny and Theo. His voice had changed. It was no longer gentle. It was the voice of a man who had just learned that his own blood had betrayed him, and now would have to decide what betrayal deserved. "Bring the first aid kit to my office," he told Theo. "And Vinny, lock the gates. Nobody leaves this property tonight. Nobody." Then he offered Rowan his hand. She looked at his palm, at the gold ring on his middle finger, at the scar tissue on his knuckles that told its own story of violence. She looked at his face, at the scar that split his cheekbone, at his eyes that were dark and unreadable and something else she could not name. She took his hand. The rain fell in sheets across Miami, November rain that cut like a blade wrapped in ice. Rowan Chen sat on the concrete floor of her apartment, her back against the refrigerator that had stopped humming 2 days ago. Her daughter Ava slept in the next room, small and fragile behind a door that did not lock. The apartment smelled like mold and desperation, like stale coffee and the ghost of meals that had never happened. In her trembling hands, she held 3 pieces of paper. The eviction notice, served that afternoon by Catherine Mercer herself, dressed in white wool that probably cost more than Rowan earned in 3 months. The hospital bill for Ava's emergency surgery, stamped in red, 72 hours remaining. And the handwritten debt list that Matteo had tucked into his shirt pocket, the mathematics of her drowning written in her own careful script. She looked at the numbers. Rent overdue, $1,280. Electric shut-off notice, $200 she did not have. Medicine for Ava's asthma, $140 a month she could not afford. The surgery that would save her daughter's life, for $1,000 that lived in another universe. In her wallet, $200 remained. $200. The rain hammered against the window like something trying to break through. Rowan's eye was still swollen from Tyler's fist, still the color of a bruise that would not fade. Her throat carried the shape of his hands, purple fingerprints that mapped a violence she could not escape. She had paid every rent increase Catherine demanded. She had scraped together every penalty fee, every sudden violation charge, every excuse to tighten the noose. And Catherine had smiled while doing it, the smile of a woman who understood that cruelty works best when delivered slowly. Rowan stood and walked to the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at her was a stranger, hollowed and tired and beaten into something that resembled surrender. She opened the medicine cabinet. Inside, a bottle of pills prescribed to her mother 11 years ago. Still half full. Still waiting. Her hand reached for it. Then Ava coughed in the next room. A small sound. A child's cough. A reminder that another body depended on this body, that her daughter's breathing was tethered to her own choice to keep breathing. Rowan closed the cabinet without taking anything. She sat on the bathroom floor and wept, not because she was broken, but because she was not broken enough to stop fighting. She pressed her palms against her eyes and made a choice that was not really a choice at all. She would find a way. She had to. Ava was sleeping in the next room, and that sleeping child was the only thing in the world that mattered. At that same hour, 40 blocks away, Matteo Vitale stood in his office overlooking the Miami skyline. The city sprawled below him, a kingdom of lights and secrets. Vinny entered quietly, closing the door behind him. "We have the information on Catherine Mercer," Vinny said. His voice was careful, neutral, the voice of a man who had learned to read his boss's silences. "Her entire empire is built on housing fraud. She has displaced 300 families in the last 5 years. Charged poor families double rates while keeping the properties code violating. One woman died. She had asthma. The landlord refused to fix the mold in her apartment. Matteo did not turn from the window. One woman. Yes, boss. One woman with a daughter. The daughter is still alive. She is 27 years old now, and she still has nightmares about finding her mother." Matteo's hands clenched into fists. He thought of the debt list. He thought of Rowan's careful handwriting, each number a small surrender, each name a person who had decided she was worth nothing. Catherine Mercer was on that list. Catherine Mercer had decided that Rowan's daughter's emergency surgery was less important than the penalty fees she could extract. "And Tyler?" Matteo asked. "At his penthouse," Vinny said. "Alone. Gambling online. Losing money he does not have to men who will kill him if he does not pay." "He will pay," Matteo said quietly. "But not how he thinks." The night moved forward like clockwork. At 5 a.m., while the city still slept, federal agents arrived at Tyler Brennan's penthouse building. They came in 4 black SUVs, moving with the precision of men who knew exactly what they were looking for. The anonymous tip had been detailed, complete with account numbers and wire transfers and evidence of every crime Tyler had committed in his desperate attempts to maintain the life he thought he deserved. Tyler was still in bed when they knocked. He answered the door in silk pajamas, his face moving from confusion to terror in a single breath. "Tyler Brennan, we have a federal warrant," the lead agent said. "You are under arrest for embezzlement, racketeering, witness intimidation, and attempted extortion." Tyler's screams echoed through the penthouse. He was dragged from his apartment in handcuffs, his silk pajamas no match for the November morning. By 7 o'clock, his face was on every Miami news station. The footage showed him begging, his composure shattered, his threats meaningless against the machinery of federal prosecution. In his office, Matteo watched the coverage on his phone. 40 years in federal prison. The prosecutor had explained it carefully. Tyler's gambling debts would consume every asset his family owned. The houses would be seized. The accounts would be frozen. What remained of his life would be spent behind bars, betrayed by his own uncle, understanding too late that cruelty earns its payment in full measure. Too quick would be a bullet, Matteo thought. This was systematic destruction. This was the kind of justice that taught a lesson. But Catherine Mercer's lesson needed to be different. She stood in the ballroom of the Fontainebleau Hotel, a charity luncheon she had orchestrated to cement her status as Miami's most generous philanthropist. She wore a white Chanel dress and pearls that had belonged to her mother, and she was smiling at the cameras, accepting compliments from the mayor, from business leaders, from women who wanted what she had. The federal agents arrived at 12:56 p.m. They moved through the ballroom like a dark current, and the room fell silent, the way rooms fall silent when power suddenly reverses direction. Catherine Mercer, the lead agent, said, "We have a warrant for your arrest. Charges include housing fraud, embezzlement of tenant security deposits, racketeering, and violation of Fair Housing Acts." Catherine's champagne glass fell to the marble floor. It shattered into 1,000 pieces that reflected the light like broken promises. "This is a mistake," she said. Her voice was still smooth, still commanding. "I have lawyers." "I have?" "You have 37 counts of federal charges," the agent said. "Your lawyers can meet you at arraignment." The cameras caught everything. Catherine Mercer, architect of row and suffering, being led from her charity luncheon in handcuffs. The white dress. The pearls. The face that had smiled while tightening the noose. By noon, the footage had spread across Miami's news. By evening, national outlets were running the story. By morning, every major news station in the country was covering the arrest of the real estate mogul who had built an empire on the suffering of poor families. The properties were seized. The tenants came forward. A woman with a daughter who had died from asthma. A family of four who had lived in a basement flooded with mold. An elderly man whose rent had doubled in a single year. They gave their names to cameras. They told their stories. They showed the photographs of their children. Catherine collapsed in her holding cell. She trembled like a cornered animal, like a woman who had believed the rules applied to other people and was only now discovering her mistake. Matteo watched the coverage from his office. He did not smile. Smiling would have been too small a response to what he had set in motion. What he felt was older than satisfaction, deeper than vengeance. It was the feeling of a man who had learned long ago that justice deferred compounds like debt, and that sometimes the only way to balance the scales is to move with precision, with patience, with the kind of deliberate force that teaches a final lesson. Meanwhile, in her apartment on the other side of the city, Rowan woke to her phone ringing. It was the hospital. Ava's surgery was approved. The surgery she could never afford was suddenly, impossibly approved. The voice on the phone explained about an anonymous donation, a fund established for families in financial crisis, and would she like to schedule the procedure? Rowan said yes. She said yes, and she kept saying yes until the words became tears, and the tears became the kind of weeping that comes from a body that has finally, impossibly, been given permission to breathe. 3 days after the federal agents came for Tyler Brennan, Rowan sat beside Ava's hospital bed and watched her daughter sleep. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm, a sound like a heartbeat that no longer belonged to fear. Ava's small chest rose and fell beneath the white blanket. The surgery was done. Perfect. The surgeon had used words like complete recoveries and no complications, and she will breathe easier than she has in years. Rowan had stopped hearing after that. She had stopped being able to process a world where the word impossible no longer applied to her daughter's survival. The room was private. Expensive. The kind of room that cost more than she had earned in 3 months of double shifts. She did not know who had paid for it. The hospital administrator had simply explained that an anonymous benefactor had covered all costs, all procedures, everything. When Rowan asked who, the woman in the pressed navy suit had smiled apologetically and said the donor had requested complete privacy. The gift came with no name attached, only a card that read, "For the child who will now breathe." A soft knock interrupted the beeping of machines. Vinny entered, his massive frame filling the doorway like a shadow given weight. He was one of Matteo's men. She had seen him that night in the underground poker room, had watched him stand motionless as she threw herself at an armed enforcer. Now he held an envelope in his hand, cream-colored, expensive, sealed. "Boss wanted you to have this," Vinny said. His voice was surprisingly gentle for a man who looked like he had been carved from granite. He placed the envelope on the bedside table and turned to leave. "Wait," Rowan whispered. Her voice came out fractured, barely a sound. "Tell him I cannot accept anything else. This surgery, this room, it is too much. I have no way to repay this." Vinny paused at the door. He looked at her sitting there in the visitor's chair, her clothes wrinkled from sleeping in them, her eyes hollow from 3 days of not leaving her daughter's side. When he spoke, his words came out measured, like stones being placed one at a time into still water. "Boss says you already did," Vinny said. "The night you did not look away. Most people look away." He left before she could respond. Rowan opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a lease agreement. The apartment was in a safe building in a neighborhood where children played outside without their mothers counting the hours until they could lock the doors. 2 bedrooms. Updated plumbing. Heat that worked. The rent was paid for 1 year. 12 months of breathing room stretched out in front of her like a miracle she was not allowed to refuse. She pressed the lease against her chest and made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite laughing. It was the sound of a person discovering that the world could sometimes move in directions other than downward. That evening, Matteo came. He arrived without warning, the door opening to reveal him in a charcoal suit that cost more than her annual salary, his dark hair slightly damp from the Miami rain. Behind him, the hallway was empty. Even his men had been told to wait outside. Inside this room, it was only him and Rowan and the sleeping child on the hospital bed. Matteo pulled the visitor's chair close. He sat down slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled. For a long moment he simply looked at Ava, at her small face peaceful in sleep, her breathing easy and unobstructed for the first time since her mother could remember. "She looks like you," he said finally. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "She has her father's eyes," Rowan replied. She had not meant to say it. The words escaped before she could stop them. "He is not here." "No. He left when she was 3 months old. He said he could not handle the medical appointments, the fear, the money constantly running out. He said it was too much." Matteo's hands clenched. The gold watch on his wrist caught the fluorescent light. When he spoke again, there was something dangerous in his tone, something that made her understand why men followed him without question. "You should have run that night. When Tyler's men came for you after he saw what you would not do. You should have run." "Where would I have gone?" Rowan asked. "I had $200 left in the world. Ava needed $4,000 for surgery in 72 hours. Running does not change mathematics. You could have given Tyler what he wanted. You could have stolen the information from my office. You could have walked away from a dying man in that poker room. Most people choose themselves." "I know," Rowan said quietly. "I watched most people choose themselves my entire life. My father chose himself. Her father chose himself. I promised myself that I would not be that person, even when it would have been easier. Even when I was starving." She did not know why she told him the next part. Maybe it was because the room felt safe. Maybe it was because Ava was sleeping and could not hear. Maybe it was because he was looking at her like she was a person and not a problem to be solved. 2 weeks before Tyler beat me, I had $47 left after Catherine Mercer took her penalty fees. For the month. For everything. Ava needed to eat. I worked a 16-hour shift and I had not eaten in 2 days. After midnight, I found leftovers from the staff meal in the kitchen trash. Clean containers, still sealed. I stood over the garbage bin and I ate like an animal, Matteo. Like something less than human. She watched his face as she spoke. Watched the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands became fists, the way something ancient and violent stirred behind his eyes. "Tyler came in," she continued. "He saw me. He laughed. He took a photograph and he told me he was going to show you what pathetic staff you employed. Within an hour, everyone in the mansion knew. Nobody said anything but I saw their faces. I saw the way they looked at me after that. I was invisible before. After that, I was a joke. Matteo stood abruptly. He walked to the window and looked out at the Miami rain, at the city lights blurred by water running down the glass. When he turned back, something in him had shifted. Something fundamental had realigned. "You will never be invisible again," he said. "Not to me. And never again to anyone else." He did not raise his voice. The threat in his words was not loud. It was the kind of quiet that echoes. 6 months later, the world had changed in ways that could be measured in court documents and prison sentences. Catherine Mercer had been sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for systematic housing fraud, tenant intimidation, and extortion targeting vulnerable families. The properties were seized. The tenants came forward with their photographs and their stories. A woman whose daughter had died from asthma because the apartment was flooded with mold. A family of four who had lived in a basement. An elderly man whose rent had doubled in a single year. They gave their names to cameras. Catherine Mercer collapsed in her holding cell. She trembled like a woman who had believed the rules applied only to other people. Tyler Brennan was facing 40 years. The photograph he had taken of Rowan eating from the trash had become evidence in his federal case, proof of systematic abuse of household staff. His family name was destroyed. His lawyers sent letter after letter to Matteo begging for mercy. Matteo returned them unopened. Rowan worked now at the legitimate offices of Vitale Holdings, a real estate development company that built affordable housing in underserved neighborhoods. Her title was community liaison. Her salary was enough to breathe. Ava attended a private school where she had stopped using her inhaler 3 months ago. The doctors said her lungs had healed completely. On a Wednesday afternoon in April, Rowan brought coffee to Matteo's office. She had started doing this recently, small acts of routine that felt like rituals of a different life. He looked up from his desk and gestured for her to stay instead of leaving. She sat in the chair across from him, the same chair where she had sat 6 months earlier when he had explained that his own brother had betrayed him, that he had learned long ago that family means nothing, that trust is illusion, that mercy is weakness. Until one invisible maid had thrown herself at armed men for a stranger. He pushed a newspaper across the desk. The headline read, "Brennan sentenced to 40 years in federal prison." Below it was a photograph of Tyler being led away in handcuffs, his face destroyed by the reality of consequences. "You gave me something I thought I lost when my brother betrayed me," Matteo said. His voice was different than it had been before. Softer. Still dangerous, but dangerous in the way a storm can be beautiful. A reason to believe one person acting with courage can change everything. Rowan pulled out a piece of paper from her pocket. It was old now, worn at the edges. Her handwritten debt list, the one she had carried with her through every impossible day. Every single line had been marked through with a single word, paid. "I was drowning," she said. "No," Matteo replied. "You pulled yourself out when you refused to look away. I just made sure you did not drown after." 2 weeks later, they stood together in the children's ward of St. Mary's Hospital, the same hospital where Ava had been treated, the same building where Rowan had learned what miracles felt like. They had just established an anonymous fund for families facing impossible medical bills. Single parents. Families where the mathematics did not work and the clocks were counting down. First recipient, a man with a daughter who needed surgery in 72 hours. His hands had shaken exactly like Rowan's hands had shaken 6 months earlier when someone told her the word impossible no longer applied. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life, Rowan said. Sometimes that hand belongs to someone everyone else pretended not to see, Matteo replied. Outside, the November rain fell against the windows. Inside the hospital, inside this room, it was warm. This story teaches us that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Only one person choosing to see, to act, to refuse to look away. Rowan Chen was invisible. Catherine Mercer believed she could stay invisible forever. Tyler Brennan believed he could erase people with photographs and laughter. But invisibility breaks when someone refuses to accept it. Rowan refused. And everything changed. If this story moved you, drop a like right now and share it with someone fighting their own impossible battle. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about the moment everything changes. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been invisible? Have you ever known someone who refused to look away? Let me know. Every comment is a precious source of motivation that helps us continue creating meaningful stories. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.